Welcome, everybody. We are really excited to talk to you today about the power of AI analytics and how we can bring our beloved BI and data analytics together with the enhancements of generative AI. And quite importantly, remembering that people are still at the heart of this journey. So firstly, I want to start with the thank you. So thanks to IT Web and the Keyrus team for all the organizing. Thank you to Salesforce and Tableau for joining us today. And quite importantly, a big thank you to you. Thanks for taking the time today to join us. And like James has mentioned, please feel free to post your questions. We will discuss those later. Yeah, I'm going to start off with this slide. Trying to find a business insight. I think a lot of us feel like this. We feel overwhelmed with the amount of things that we need to look for. So whether that's a dashboard or a report to find that business insight, or scanning through our emails to find some important piece of information, we are overwhelmed. So if you feel like this, I'm here to tell you that you're not alone. I believe that we're at an exciting chapter of modern analytics, and James has sort of alluded to that, how BI and Gen AI are coming together to help sort of simplify our lives. Before we go into Gen AI and what AI can actually mean, I just want to start off with, what do businesses want from BI platforms? And really to sort of pose the question as well as a bit of a definition. And I think a lot of us understand this definition. We want our BI platforms to gather data from all our systems, analyze it, visualize it, help answer business questions, enabling business to become data-driven. So I think a lot of us are doing some of these elements really well. I believe that there's a key task that's missing where businesses are struggling to become data-driven. And I'm sure a lot of you feel that you are doing some of these things right, but the ability to become truly data-driven has become or is a challenge. So if we look at a typical business intelligence landscape today, I'm sure a lot of us are using one or maybe multiple BI tools within the business, but typically the types of data analytics that we are performing is we've got descriptive analytics. We have the ability to look at our past information, our past data, and asking what actually happened. Then moving into diagnostic, why did something happen? We're still looking at our historical data, but we have the ability to ask why something has happened. Then looking into the future, a lot of these BI tools have had these functionalities for a while, the ability to predict, the ability to forecast. And really all that is, and James sort of alluded to it, is AI has been around for a while. It's just we're talking generative AI. So how does generative AI sort of impact this type of typical BI landscape? And you might be thinking there is a piece of this data analytics puzzle that is missing. And yes, that's the prescriptive. But before we get into prescriptive, what I want to set is another scene of a definition talking about generative AI. Generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence technology, and quite importantly, it generates text, images, and other media using generative models. So like we've said, AI has been around for quite some time. The most recent development is the ability to have a generative model where we are asking a question, that question gets posed to these generative models. We know things like ChatGPT is providing us text and it generates new content, and it can be quite creative content. Things like Midjourney that are providing us images, and various other technologies and AI models that are producing media and other content. So how does this impact our BI landscape? With Gen AI coming into the BI landscape, I believe that it's enabling us to become a lot more prescriptive in the way that we do analytics. I don't think the descriptive, diagnostic, and predictive is going anywhere. So I do believe that is here to stay. It's the next chapter of how do we become more data-driven, where we can actually decide an action based on the outcome of a Gen AI model or a business question that I've asked, and the technology is actually providing me with a decisive action that I can go and perform. So that's really where Gen AI is coming in to help us make sense of all this information that we are presented with daily. So is Gen AI part of your data strategy? This is a research paper performed by Salesforce talking about whether it's a game changer or is it overhyped. So they've interviewed over 500 senior IT professionals, and 57% believe that Gen AI is a game changer. There's 33 that believe it is overhyped and 10% that are unsure. So these are some really interesting numbers here. If we look at some stats that I've found in this Forbes article, I sort of pose the question, is this an opportunity for a revolution? Is AI part of our next chapter, enabling us to call this a revolution? I believe it has massive potential, but I think us as data professionals are at a key crossroad to pave the path of what AI could look like for businesses and for society. So some of the key stats: AI market is projected to reach $407 billion by 2027. AI is expected to contribute 21% net increase to the US GDP by 2030. ChatGPT had 1 million users within 5 days. So this talks about the mass adoption and how excited people are to experiment with this technology. 64% of businesses believe that AI will increase their overall productivity, but over 75% of consumers are concerned about misinformation of AI. So if we've got all these really interesting and beneficial stats about AI, but over 75% of consumers are concerned about misinformation, what does that mean for generative AI? And what does that mean for the future of Gen AI, specifically in the analytics space? So I'm going to pause here and ask James to open up our first poll. I'm keen to hear from you as our audience. Is your company planning on deploying AI for your business intelligence needs within the next 6 months? So we've got options of definitely, possibly, no, or I'm not aware. So you'll see in your panel, the polls has got a little red icon. So I'd encourage you to spend a minute, navigate to the polls, and we'll discuss that shortly.
Quickly jumping in there. Thank you very much, Craig. Yes, you guys have found it right there. So as you're voting, Craig, while they're voting, is there, because of generative AI, is there a lot more interest in bringing it into business intelligence in the last year? Because it seems there's a lot more knowledge or awareness of this technology all of a sudden.
Absolutely, James. And I think the amount of use cases that generative AI can solve, it almost seems endless. So I think it's that natural progression of how do we define the relative use cases where we can use generative AI to solve business challenges. And BI has been here for many years. So I think that natural progression is how do we bring these two really powerful technologies together to add value to business? And, coming back to my first slide, how do we make sure that people within our business feel less overwhelmed? And I think there's massive potential for where we're going with Gen AI and analytics.
I absolutely agree, and I've been thinking about the fields that Gen AI is going to affect a lot, and you're right, analytics is so in the front of that pack. So maybe all of us will just be chatting to these machines in the future. I mean, it's technically we're doing a chat GPT already. So we're looking at our answers here. Thank you very much for voting, guys. Is your company planning on deploying AI for your business intelligence needs within the next 6 months? Definitely 33% are very happy to hear that. 44% possibly, only 8% say no, and 13% say I am not aware. So definitely seeing you guys are out there eager to use this. Thank you for voting. I'm going to pop this into the chat, and back to you, Craig.
Cool. Thank you, James. And thanks to everybody for participating. Interesting to hear that 33% are definitely considering this, 44% possibly. I want to sort of go into the next piece here, where what we're seeing with generative AI is this trust gap, where 67% don't believe they are prepared to implement generative AI due to security concerns. So I'd be very interested to have conversations with the 33% who are definitely implementing generative AI. I think there's a lot that we need to unpack in terms of data security. James spoke about this, the hallucinations that these generative AI models can actually present to us. We know that they generate new content based on information or data that it has available, but it may not necessarily get that new content correct. It might be looking at incorrect data, or it has a lack of context where it's looking at data, but the question that was posed doesn't actually have the relevant data behind the scenes for the generative AI model to give you the correct answer. Things like toxicity and bias, it might have a biased approach in the way that it's generating these outputs, and then talking to model integrations. And I'd like to call Francois into the conversation here. Francois, I know that you're very close to this, and what we've seen in the market is some very real scenarios of data security and hallucinations. If you care to share some of these articles with us.
Yeah, so hi all. So I'm the field CTO for Tableau here in EMEA. And when I saw these concerns, when I saw this number 67%, that's a pretty high number of people that don't trust the technology. And I guess what we've seen across the region is a lot of companies have already blocked OpenAI from their corporate network because they're kind of worried about this. So when we're looking at, is this real or is it not? There have been a number of legal cases already out there that kind of show the potential risks associated with this that we need to overcome when we are deploying a trust model. Firstly, data security. We've seen what does it feel like when an AI company treats your data like their product? We've really seen, for example, GitHub Copilot get sued by a number of software developers because essentially it was creating code suggestions based on copyrighted code, so injecting copyrighted code into people's code base. We saw a number of artists. Sarah Silverman was part of this group that sued OpenAI because they were essentially using their content without authority and exposing it to people. So that's still going through the courts. What this means for businesses, I think, is if your data gets shared with an AI model as part of a prompt, and it gets used to train the AI model, then that data can be leaked to other people, and people have genuine concerns about that. The second thing is hallucinations. We've already seen a number of cases where, for example, a number of lawyers in the US used OpenAI to write case law. And essentially what happens is when the AI model doesn't have enough information, it just hallucinates. In this first case that you've got here, some lawyers received a fine because 5 completely fictitious cases were presented to a judge as part of the argument. You'll see there's some defamation suits as well. So I think people are worried about what happens if they use an external model and it hallucinates an answer, and that creates reputational risk for the company. So it's a really interesting field and really dynamic. And I guess also when you think about the pace of change, we think a lot of these like risks and the opportunities will kind of evolve quite a lot over the next 6 months.
Thanks, Francois. So coming back to the slides and what I presented, that prescriptive deciding in action, if we're not trusting Gen AI, that prescriptive deciding in action is not going to gain traction. Gen AI might not get off the ground, so to speak. So how do we overcome that? And the way I want to present this is to use an analogy. My analogy is around looking back into history, where a new innovative technology came onto the scene. Imagine it's 1903. You're sitting in your living room, sipping your tea, and you pick up a newspaper and you read that a flying machine takes to the air. You read this article, you might be thinking, well, that doesn't seem safe. How does a big metal machine fly in the air? You are sort of flabbergasted that this is even possible. But you might also be thinking, well, wow, that looks really exciting. I would really like to be part of this. How do I sign up? So using this analogy and thinking of a new innovative technology coming into our industry and into society, how does society actually respond? And typically we can bucket this into two different types of people and the way that they respond. There's going to be people that are really excited, the innovators, the early adopters. They want to get their hands on this technology as quickly as possible. I spoke of that stat, 1 million people signed up for ChatGPT in the first 5 days of it going live. But the other side of the equation is people who have fear, people who do not trust the technology. So how do we overcome that fear to make sure that we can at least convert them into feeling safe to use that technology? So the question is, how do we build that trust, and how did aviation overcome these challenges? I've taken a snippet from Stephen Covey. He was an author and a businessman. He speaks in his book, The Speed of Trust, One Thing That Changes Everything. In the book, he presents this idea that trust is not just a soft social virtue, but it's a hard-edged economic factor that significantly affects performance and profitability. So his whole premise here is that, yes, trust is a human emotion, but it is so important for businesses to be successful. And I think that's somewhat overlooked when we come up with our data strategies and implement certain technologies. So coming back to the analogy, how did aviation overcome these challenges where we look at it today and at any given time, 10,000 aircrafts could be in the air? And that's just aircrafts, not necessarily the people sitting in those aircrafts. So how did aviation overcome the trust barrier and scale to what it is today? Without trust, aviation could not scale. And without governance, people could not trust. Okay, so two powerful statements here. Without trust, aviation could not scale. And without the governance, people could not trust aviation. So some of the key things that enabled people to trust aviation over the years, I've listed them as bullet points here. So things like strict regulation and oversight, safety records, transparency, that talks to the governance and how important that governance is. Making sure that there's highly trained professionals, the emphasis on education and information. Making sure that aviation was always on the most advanced technology. Rigorous maintenance standards, making sure that that technology is fine-tuned and it's always performing at its best. Crisis preparation, so making sure that if there is a disaster, how do we respond to that crisis or that disaster? Aviation created a safety culture where they needed to make sure that the majority of people, all people, felt safe. Later on, international standards and industry reputation came on. The education as well as the positive experiences. So that word of mouth where people say, I've been on a flight, it was actually great, and sharing that sort of word of mouth experience. And really my analogy is trying to portray this picture of we've seen disruptive technologies before as society, and society has managed to respond. I think with Gen AI coming into the foreground, we need to make sure that we can learn from history and make sure that people can trust AI in a similar fashion. So having strict regulations for AI, making sure we have highly trained professionals that know what they're doing, making sure that our technology meets the standards of what AI means, rigorous maintenance, making sure that that is continuously maintained, having disaster recovery processes and procedures, building that safety culture. If we don't think AI is safe, how do we build that safety culture? I think international standards and industry reputation is coming to Gen AI. And there's definitely an education and information process coming through. And to James's points in the beginning, there are many positive experiences that are coming out, people using Gen AI, but obviously in a safe manner. So that closes off my analogy. I'm going to hand over to Francois, where he's going to take us through a demonstration for us. Thanks, Francois.
Okay, hi all. So what I'd like to do today is really kind of answer three questions, which is the first is how do we scale? So get Gen AI experiences into more users, but also scale BI experiences more generally to a wider set of the population. The second is trust. And then the third is this idea of dynamic grounding. How do we bring the right data to the model so that you get a good AI insight? Before I kick off, we're a publicly traded company here at Tableau and Salesforce. So I'm going to reference some futures. We ask that you make buying decisions based on what is currently available. And I'll be kind of clear about signposting what is currently there versus what is coming in the future. So let's kick off with the first of the key questions that we'd like to try and answer. So how do we get data and AI to more users and make more business users data-driven? So this is the scale of the problem that we see today. This is why we think we need generative AI to create new user experiences. When we look at, when we survey organizations, we tend to find that most CEOs want their organization to be data-driven. But when we actually look at frontline user adoption, we find that typically only 30% of them identify as data-driven. When we look at that, there's a bunch of reasons for that. The first is skills and education. So we see a lot of problems with frontline users not able to question KPIs or communicate using data-driven methods. And quite importantly, they find it difficult to find internal, external collaborators. So when they have a data problem, they don't know who to reach out to work alongside. So that's the first set of problems, skills and adoption. The second set of problem is this idea of actionability. So a lot of the time when we measure what people are doing when they use a chart, for example, or they view a KPI in a dashboard, what do they do next? We don't necessarily find a link between the KPI and them actually carrying out some action in one of the other applications. So that's the second challenge. The third challenge is just the fact that there's so much information in a typical organization. There's so many different applications. Firstly, to tie that information together into a single view of truth is hard. But also, we typically find in a lot of organizations, there are multiple copies of the same data and multiple definitions of the same KPI. And that also leads to an erosion of trust. So if we're going to go from 30% to 70, 80, 90%, how do we go about doing that? So the first thing is we need to recognize that there are different types of data consumers out there. And historically, I guess Tableau was really, really focused on this type of consumer, the consumer that spends time in our analytical community. So we've built this massive analytical community of people that are data curious, people that want to be able to discover data sets that are relevant to them, find other people that are working on similar data problems, collaborate with them. And when they find a data set, they like to be able to look at it and dig down and down and down and down until they find that kind of one strategic insight. And so for this type of user, their expectation from Tableau is that it is a data marketplace for them. So it's the sort of place where they can go and they can, discover what other people like them are doing. This is Tableau Public. This is our public site where people work on the product to collaborate on public data sets. But you'll see that the kind of workflow that people typically have here is they dig down and down and down until they find something which is relevant to them. So in this case, this visualization that I'll show you here is looking at clinical trials in the US over the last 30 or so years. And once someone finds something relevant inside Tableau, then they may want to, for example, open that up and dig even deeper. So look behind the data that someone else generated and see whether or not they can find something deeper that answers their really specific question. So that's the typical workflow of someone that's data curious. They search for assets. When they find assets, they want to explore them. They want to ask even deeper questions. And historically, the experiences that we've brought into Tableau have been optimized to support these data curious people. So what do they need? Well, today they can get generative insights. When they look at a dashboard like this, which has got too much information, they might want a narrative to tell them, look, don't look at everything. Just drill in on this one specific point here where we know there is an interesting outlier. When you click on that one point and you drill down to that one perspective, we know that you'll find a high value insight there, and that'll help you to satisfy your data curiosity and dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And yes, when you click on that, you find that the model is correct and the insight is there. When you find an interesting spike like this, you may want to work with an AI to explore unvisualized data. You might want to say, well, what other information is there behind this data point that is not visualized on the dashboard that might explain why that data is so unusual? And so these experiences that I'm showing you here, where you are working to get plain English explanations, and where you're working alongside an AI to get hypotheses, why is this data point so unusual? Those experiences are really geared towards the 30% of people that are data curious, the people that want to be able to discover data and dig down and down and down. But we know that that's not going to reach the entire market. So we know that there's a lot of people out there that are kind of, it's not that they're not data curious, it's that they spend their time in their apps rather than in the BI tool. And we know that historically, the way we would have tried to reach these people is, for example, by giving them subscriptions. But if you get a subscription to a dashboard and it lands in your inbox and it presents irrelevant data day after day after day after day, you tend to just start ignoring that. So what we found is that for this type of user, for the 70% of people who are not data curious, they are more workflow centric, the way that we reach them is we reach them with newsfeed-like experiences, where instead of showing me a bunch of content in a marketplace, I want you to give me a basket of KPIs that are relevant to me, and I want you to show me what I need to know about my business rather than everything. And I want that to be contextual. I want that to be something where I can go really easily from those insights to my workflow so that I can do great things with the data that I've been notified about. And so that's why in December of this year, we are launching an additional set of experiences which are aimed at the 70% of people that today are not actively engaged with data on a day-to-day basis. And so what you'll see is there's a very different experience that we are thinking about. So firstly, we've taken all the KPIs that would typically be inside, hundreds of dashboards across your BI environment, and we brought them together into this new basket of metrics that is relevant to this one specific user. So for this one user here, Caroline, these are the KPIs that matter most to her. But more importantly, this KPI has been brought to the top left because it's the KPI that's had the most interesting data change. So Caroline doesn't want to see everything. She just wants to see what she should do first today. And in this case, we are monitoring what normal looks like for this measure. So we're building up a model of what normal looks like. And we know that this is interesting because it's got the most interesting deviation from normal. Now, what's important about these new experiences is they build on top of existing Tableau published data sources. So this is not taking you away from all the work you've already done inside your BI platform. And also, this will generate engagement. So it'll generate curiosity so that some of these people may decide to dig from this metric into the dashboard behind it or the data source behind it and explore deeper in that way. So hopefully we make more people data curious with this. But we also know that a lot of people, they need a more linear flow in order to be able to explore their data. So what I may want to do, for example, is use one of these AI-assisted follow-up questions. So we're looking at the top drivers and dimensions behind this high-level data point here, and we're giving you suggestions for follow-on questions you may want to ask that will get you to an interesting insight. In this case, I've gone from an interesting spike in appliance sales to an insight about exactly which product category is driving that spike. And so that sort of flow is the way that we make these people more curious about what's going on behind that data point. Now, these are the experiences we launch in December of this year. Later on, sort of in the next 6 months or so, we'll be launching these really unstructured search experiences where you'll be asked really vague questions, and this is where Gen AI has a real impact on the sort of things that we can answer. So, because we understand the context of all the questions that people ask to get to this point, and we understand the taxonomy around the data, we can translate a really vague question, what else should I know, into a really specific insight. In this case, the most interesting next level insight is the fact that inventory fill rate is down at this one store, which means that you will miss the market opportunity presented by this increase in demand in the specific product. So that's what it feels like to be one of these users and explore your basket of metrics in the platform. But we don't think that that's enough. We think that also you will need to share these in your collaboration channels where people work. And when you share with someone else, for example, that other person may want to continue to explore those metrics without leaving their collaboration platform. So continue to ask deeper and deeper questions in their workflow. And we think that that'll drive more extract. That'll make more people interact with the data and use the data more often. So that's Pulse. And that's what we're doing to make sure that we make data easy for everyone. And we go from 30% of people identifying as data-driven today to 70, 80, 90% of people. And you can see that generative AI is weaved all the way through that, from the high-level summaries to the way that we interpret those follow-up questions in detail, to the way that we suggest follow-on questions for them. All of those experiences are helping people to have a more fluid interaction with their data and get over those skills barriers, which we've just stopped them from being data curious. So that's the first question I wanted to answer today. Now, behind the scenes, we are building these experiences, Pulse, on top of generative AI models. And so we still have to address those problems. How do we make sure that we take care of data security and hallucination so that people can trust the insights that are coming out of that? And this is where we have some benefits, because we have built this whole Tableau Pulse experience on top of this thing that we inherit from our parent company, Salesforce, which is the Einstein Trust Layer. So this is essentially a platform which sits between the data that we are surfacing in Pulse and between the data that we are retrieving from all of your databases and the generative model that we are using to generate some of those insights and those narratives and interpret the meaning behind questions. And our experience is, before you can send data to a model, number one, you need to make sure that you have a zero retention contract in place with that model. So we make sure that we have contractual arrangements in place, which mean that if we send a prompt to a model, they are not allowed to retain that data beyond the length of time it takes to answer the prompt. They are not allowed to use any of that data for training, because we know that as soon as that data enters their vector database, it's a free-for-all. Other people may be served with that information. But in addition to that, that's not enough. We can't just have contractual arrangements which enable us to use those prompts. We also need to make sure that we, for example, supply enough information to make the prompt meaningful. And before the data ever exits your organization and goes to a generative AI model, we need to make sure that we mask out all the identifiable information. So before the data is exited from your organization to the model, we will mask out all the identifying information, we'll tokenize it. And then when the data comes back in, we'll demask that data before we send it to the user. So in that way, you'll be able to use the model without having to run the risk of data security breaches because of the fact that you're exposing data outside your organization. And you'll be able to maintain compliance with your data regulations, which, for example, may prohibit you from sending data across international borders that is of a specific class. So that's the trust layer. Just one final topic I want to touch on, just to show you a little bit about how Pulse works behind the scenes. The way we built this is, and this comes down to how we do dynamic grounding and how we make sure that we retrieve enough relevant information from all of your data sources so that we can make these AI-assisted experiences intelligent and meaningful. In order to make Pulse work, we've had to integrate with next-gen experiences like generative AI. But mainly those are being used to, for example, understand the sentiment behind a question. They're being asked, when I've retrieved a basket of data, they're being used to write narratives on top of that so that we create human readable summaries of what those pieces of data look like. But generative AI is not good at a few things. It's not good at deterministic math. It's not good at understanding level of detail. And so we've built that on top of our existing platform. So we use Tableau's core IP, which is this thing that we call VizQL, which is an abstract language that translates between the question being asked and the queries being issued of your underlying platform. So the insights platform and the metrics layer are all still deterministic. They still run on top of Tableau's semantic layer. And that way we make sure that we are surfacing really, really concrete, valid signals before we try and invoke an AI with those signals. The second thing is we've built Pulse in a way that it runs on top of your existing Tableau published data sources. So this inherits all of the connectivity capabilities within Tableau. So if you are leveraging a modern data platform like Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery, for example, we can use live query against that. And that means that you can build these insights on top of really granular, huge data sets that sit inside the modern data platform. If you are building on top of an on-prem data source like a SQL Server, what have you, you may, for example, want to load those into extracts inside Tableau in order to get great performance for your users. You get complete flexibility over what data sources you can use, so you can use all your existing data at the right level of granularity. And then finally, and this is looking a little bit beyond just the scope of Pulse, we've also been thinking really hard about how we inject data, not just from your Tableau data sources, but from all the data sources in your environment into customers' workflows so that they can get more intelligent next actions. So you'll see this is an example of what we call dynamic grounding. If I am building a new application experience, like a chatbot-assisted service experience, the way we do that today is we essentially create prompts. But a prompt is only meaningful. In other words, the thing that I send to my generative AI model is only meaningful if I provide enough data and enough context so that I can give a really, really rich description of the problem so that my Gen AI model can generate a rich answer. In this case, I'm asking my Gen AI model for an automatically generated email. If I don't give enough information, that email is going to be really generic and kind of really useless, and it's not going to drive my business forward. So the way we solve this problem is we recognize the fact that before you can give enough information about the customer that you're trying to generate an action for, you first need to stitch together a bunch of data about that customer. And in most organizations, we see that that's really hard to do because you typically would have lots and lots of different, for example, data that would be referenced differently. You'd have different taxonomies in each business system and in each line of business and in each geography. And before you can join those together, you first need to harmonize that to a canonical model. The second challenge we have is that across all of the different data sources across your business that may refer to the same customer, they may have lots and lots of different identifiers for the same customer. So you may have a different username here, you may have a different email address there, you may have a different telephone number there. And so to stitch all those together into one grounded prompt so that you can get an intelligent recommendation for your customer is a really hard thing to do. So the way we do that is we leverage a new technology that we've deployed within Salesforce, which is called Data Cloud. So where we are trying to give one of these customer-centric recommendations for sales or service or marketing or commerce, where we're trying to create actionability inside those applications, we use Data Cloud to stitch together all of the different versions of the data that you have about your customer into one canonical data model. So that enables us to have a single point of reference. What information do I have about this customer? And the second thing we do is we use Data Cloud to stitch together all of the different identifiers that we have about the customer. So if I have different usernames and email addresses across multiple systems, now I bring those together into one unified profile so that when I start to use these AI models, I don't just get small parts of the puzzle. I get the entire picture about all the information that I hold about my customer. That is really useful because that enables us to go from ungrounded prompts where if I'm interacting with a generative AI model, I may not get the information back that I need. So in this case, for example, I just want to get the information about tracking information. But if I don't provide enough grounding, my Gen AI model will come back with it does not compute. There's not enough information to answer that question. But by using Data Cloud, what we can do is we can expose a knowledge graph to those generative AI models, which covers multiple data sets across the organization. And that knowledge graph enables us to ground that prompt so that when I ask the Gen AI model for an answer, for a really personalized recommendation, for a really personalized response, that Gen AI model now has enough information to be able to answer those really complex questions across multiple parts of your business. So that's it. Those are kind of the key three things I wanted to cover today. Number one, how do we create these experiences that people love to use that engage more business users with the data assets that matter most to them? And then secondly, how do we deliver this trust layer so that we are, for example, doing things like masking, so that we are providing enough grounding so that we eliminate hallucination out of that kind of prompt response flow that you typically see. And then finally, how do we bring together enough data assets and harmonize them so that when we are interacting with Gen AI, we have enough information at our disposal about the customer so that we can get like a realistic action and a good next best action. Okay, and that's it. I want to pass back to Craig just to wrap up.
Great, Francois, thank you. We are going to open up another poll. So we're keen to hear from you again. What do you believe will be the most important factor for enabling trust in your data strategy? So Francois has spoken a lot about trust and that Einstein trust layer. What are you doing in your business? And what do you think is the most important for enabling that trust? So I'll give you a couple of minutes.
Run over to the polls there. Your data quality, data governance, transparent algorithms, and user training. Which of these are the most important factors for enabling trust in your data strategy? Guys, while they're answering that, there is actually a question that relates to this. I'm going to ask it now. Isaac van der Merwe points out that, he asked, do you think that the people that have concerns about AI and data are relying too much on the outputs and not enough on leveraging the power? And he points out that being able to ask the right questions and having a good idea of the outcomes is where a lot of the power lies. So do you think a lot of people are just a bit too passive about using this and that makes them concerned or gives them fears that they could manage if they knew more?
Yeah, so the approach that we've taken is in order for those, so if you're asking a question of a Gen AI model that is kind of document-centric, that relates to public data, you'll see that, for example, OpenAI is trained on massive amounts of information that has been scraped from the internet. You can get a really good quality answer. But in the context of business, a lot of the data that you have is behind your firewall. It's like there's some challenges also. It needs to be live, so it needs to be today's data rather than data from, I think it was like 3 years ago or whatever, if you look at the latest version of GPT-4. So in order to make that work, you need to share data with the AI model so that you get a good response. And I think that's the challenge. I think you can get quite a lot of trust in using like a Gen AI model as a better search engine today on public data. I think where the trust gap really for me is oh, blimey, I'm going to be sharing my, my customer's purchase history with the AI so that I can give them like a nice, good next best action. That is sensitive data that I probably want to keep really close to me. And that's, I think, where the trust barrier is.
And likely also avoid getting fired over, like those poor guys at Samsung. I believe they ran into that problem as well. Quickly concluding our poll there, what do you believe to be the most important factor for enabling trust in your data strategy? To Francois' point, data quality, 41%, and then data governance, 48%. Transparent algorithms, only 2%. I'm so glad you guys are voting that way because that's a distraction. It's not the algorithm, it's the data. And then the last one, user training, 6%. I would expect that one would have been higher, but obviously data quality and governance take the lead there. So thank you very much for voting, guys. I will be popping that into the channel. And then, Craig, back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, James. And thanks, Francois. We are wrapping up. I want to pose a couple of questions to you. Are you ready to take flight with Gen AI, and how are you planning to build trust within your business? So we've spoken a lot about, trust, and do you have a team of trusted experts within your business to assist you on this Gen AI journey? Do you trust your current BI platform and the way that it's introducing AI capabilities, and are you aware of what those AI capabilities are? Are you aware of the sort of data governance capabilities that are actually built into your BI platform? A lot of data governance, and to the poll there, it's obviously really important for trust, but a lot of data governance is actually built into a technology. For data governance that isn't, what are the controls that you need to put in place outside of your technology stack? So if we come back to the aircraft and the aviation analogy, we know that there's security touch points when you go into an airport. They scan your bag, you walk through a security, making sure that you as an individual don't have anything that can harm others. And when you get onto the aircraft, you've got a seatbelt, you have to lift your the window blind for whatever reason. Those are all controls that have been put in place to make sure that aviation is safe and people feel safe. So what do we need to do as a business to make sure that our technology stack is safe? And do you have access to the expert training and enablement? So yes, training and enablement is obviously very important. Do you have access to the right people to make sure that you can get the relevant training and enablement? So from our side at Keyrus, we want to say a massive thank you to everybody. Thanks for attending. Thanks for the questions. I believe there are a couple more questions. So I'm going to pause on this slide if you'd like to scan to get our contact details, to reach out to Keyrus to find out more. James has mentioned that there are files that are available for download. So please feel free to download our company brochure. And like I said, you've got an opportunity here to scan to get our details to reach out.